Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT Show. I am John Drummond, and I'm your host for the next 60 minutes. Thanks to you, the TNT Show and Indie Live are growing and delivering better shows than ever before and much more exciting content. For example, you can watch the TNT Show on indielive.net, which is streamed out to YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter. Plus, on YouTube, you can view all the previous 128 shows. 128 shows, folks. We're longer lived than most BBC programs. And talking about the BBC and others, if you're upset by the media coverage of political events, where journalism is often junked in favour of stenography and or rehashed, reheated press releases, if you're looking for an alternative voice, well, you found it. We are here for you. Now is your chance to be here for us. Please support the crowdfunder. You'll see the details on the screen shortly. We, unlike the BBC, who spend £300 million a year, that's right, in Scotland, we don't have anything even approaching that. But unlike the BBC, we are here for you. And we try our very best to provide the sort of coverage and the interviews and the guests that you might find interesting. Well, it's been another great day for British democracy. On the BBC today, the SNP leader at Westminster, Stephen Flynn, called Boris Johnson a liar. Immediately, the BBC's esteemed Laura Kuenssberg intervened to say, quotes, "That's quite a charge," close quote. Good grief. The very dogs on the street know that Johnson is not only a liar, he's an incorrigible liar. But not the BBC. As I said last week in my Sunday National column, the Tory-led BBC is perhaps heading for perdition. And frankly, having watched that interview, I do not demur from that assessment. Tonight, we'll be talking to Cancer Authority and independent supporter Professor Lesley Stark, and she'll also be taking your questions live. So the details are on the screen. You can submit a question at any time, and we'll try and fit it in as best we can. As you know, TNT stands for The Nation Talks. So in many respects, this is your show. We're live and we're free. So no license, no problem. Now to our guest tonight. Let's welcome Lesley. Thanks for joining us, Lesley. How are you?
Good, thank you.
And where are you joining us from?
Tumultuous times, but quite good.
Well, you know what the old Chinese curse says, may you live in interesting times. And
Yeah.
I think we're certainly living in interesting times. Where are you speaking to us from tonight?
So I'm at my home in Scotland Well. I'm near Kinross, if anybody doesn't know where that is.
Well, I'm very prejudiced, I'm afraid, in this regard. I have terribly fond memories of Scotland Well, Kinross and Milner Thorpe. Even though for a long time I did believe that all the bad weather we experienced in Kinross came from Milner Thorpe, but maybe that was only an old wives' tale.
We don't get that weather. Ours on the other side of the loch is much better.
Yes, I hesitate to say a much nicer part, but there you go. So I think we should kick off by talking about your career. I described you as a cancer authority. Maybe you could put some flesh on the bones of that, Lesley.
So at the moment, I am professor of, it's called Nucleolar Signaling and Cancer Prevention, which is quite a mouthful, but basically I'm a molecular biologist and cell biologist by trade who focuses on the sort of mechanisms by which cancer starts and how we can prevent that. So I started by doing my, after I graduated from Aberdeen University, and then I actually got a job in Edinburgh University, but did my PhD while I was working. And I did my PhD in the role of papillomavirus and skin cancer in transplant patients. So people who have renal transplants or kidney transplants, liver transplants, who are on immunosuppressive drugs have a high prevalence of a type of skin cancer called squamous cell carcinoma, which is not the most invasive type, which is melanoma, but it can be quite life-changing. And so the thought was that, I don't know if your viewers probably know or might know, that papillomavirus causes cervical cancer. And now we have screens for papillomavirus to screen for cervical cancer, and also the young people get vaccinated against papillomavirus for cervical cancer. But it was thought that possibly skin cancer in transplant patients was caused by the same virus. So that's what I did my research on. And there is some evidence of that, but not as strong as the role of papillomavirus in cervical cancer, which is now being proven. So then after that, I moved to St Andrews, and I worked in the biochemistry department there, studying a molecule in the cell which is called NF-kappa B, which probably won't mean anything to your viewers, but it's basically what I've spent my career researching. And it's a protein, we call it, in the cell, or a complex of proteins that drive cancer. Basically, they drive the immune system, and they drive cancer. So they're very, very important for all aspects of cell growth, death, and health, basically. So after studying that in St Andrews, I moved back to Edinburgh and started my career towards independent research there. And what I started working on in Edinburgh was colon cancer. So people who take aspirin, everybody knows what aspirin is, people who take aspirin regularly, even 75 mg, the baby tablets, have a reduced risk of developing colorectal cancer. It can be up to 40%. And we've done the study even in Scotland, and we found that we had controls who didn't have colorectal cancer, and those who did, who were matched for age and sex and postcode. And we found those, and we did the survey. It's Professor Malcolm Dunlop, who's the Professor of Coloproctology in Edinburgh, did the study with patients, and we found that those who take aspirin regularly have a reduced risk of developing colon cancer. But that's been proven throughout the world. But you can't tell people to take aspirin, so viewers don't take aspirin because or don't take aspirin for prevention of colon cancer unless your doctor suggests it, because people who take aspirin regularly, it can have side effects, and so it has to be monitored. So if you're at higher risk, your doctor might suggest that is a thing to do, but not always. And so what my job has been over the years is to try and understand why aspirin is causing and prevents colon cancer, so that for two reasons really. One, so that we could identify better drugs that might do it in a better way than cancer, and that can be both preventative and therapeutic. And also, now everybody, or most people who are over 50, get offered an FIT test to screen for colorectal cancer. And many of those people have, especially elderly, have premalignant lesions in their colon called adenomas or polyps, which generally will not cause any damage at all. But it's very unclear in some situations which ones will cause damage and which ones won't. So if we knew how aspirin worked, we'd be able to give aspirin to the people who are more likely to go on maybe to develop a cancer. So it might be quite complex, but hopefully you understood most of that. So and I've worked on that in the university.
What I understood in particular was how important it is, that the work that you're doing, which is great. It's super. And the fact that it's happening in Scotland too, and the fact that you've been able to develop your career in this field in Scotland, it says a lot for the approaches that have been taken here, which sounds good.
Yeah,
it really does.
I mean, Scotland is world class in sort of therapeutic cancer research. Both Edinburgh, all the universities are world class in research. And as people know, we have like the top, more top universities in Scotland than in most countries. So we do well, and the cancer research especially is very good. So
now, have things like Brexit affected what you do?
Yes, I think that Brexit's had a very, very big impact on the science and technology industries for a number of reasons. One of them at the moment, like a lot of other places, is supply chain issues. You can imagine that the sort of rapidly evolving cancer research and any kind of research requires people to order reagents and get them quickly, and that is just not happening. You order reagents and they don't come for months. And and they're out of stock. The cost of everything has gone up dramatically. The other thing that's happening is a lot of our European colleagues left after Brexit. So I think that's a real loss for Scottish the Scottish science, and funding is another big issue. So I think that the loss of Horizon, the Horizon Europe program, which is seems to be or is dependent on the deal that's being discussed at the moment. If we lose that, then that is a major, major loss, because a lot of people are funded through European funding, and funding is very, very difficult anyway at the moment. As I say, the cost of everything is increasing dramatically. There's less money to fund any kind of research, and then with the loss of European funding, that would just be a catastrophe.
Where does that European funding come from? Which part of Europe does it come from?
Well, it comes from the European Union.
Really?
So it's a Brussels, yeah. So so the European Union have a funding agency. They call it. It's been called various different things. I think the one I keep forgetting is it was Horizon 2020, and they're sort of 5 to 10 year kind of cycles where they give out big collaborative projects, but they also give out smaller fellowships to individual people as well. So there's quite a few people in our institute have fellowships from the European Union.
Yeah, gosh, I had no idea. I mean, like a lot of people, when I look at the Brexit impact, it tends to be the areas that you would expect. I mean, empty shelves. People can't buy tomatoes, for example. Which is, the UK is not supposed to be a third world country. You should be able to buy tomatoes. I mean, this doesn't sound like rocket science, unlike what you're doing. So, but what's awful is to establish that it's actually having an impact in the work that you're doing, which is really, it's just, I guess not too many people know that.
Yeah, I think that a lot of science doesn't get, a lot of it doesn't get the sort of media attention that it probably should, and so people don't understand, one of the effects that Europe is having, Brexit is having on science and technology, which is huge. And it could get, as I say, if we have to pull out, and already people aren't being offered to be collaborate within these projects because we're in the UK and they don't know whether we'll be able to go forward, because there's a new cycle that's just started, and we have to wait to see whether we're allowed to be part of it. So it will be a disaster if that happens.
Well, besides the eventual outcome is the fact that you and your colleagues are exposed to all this uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean that is
To what end? What have you gotten? What have you gotten out of Brexit that compensates you for all this uncertainty?
Personally, nothing.
What about your colleagues?
I could rant forever about the effects that Brexit's had on me, because I have family in Europe. The basic things like sending packages, everybody's had the same issues. To family, my parents have a house in Spain. They're elderly. They used to just go there like most of the time. Now they can't. They can't even go to their own house because of the whole 90 days and 180 days limitations. So I mean, there's a lot of reasons why Brexit has been very hard.
I hear that all the time. This 90-day rule is making life very difficult for so many people. Where are they based? Are they based in the south or north of Spain?
They're in near Alicante.
That's sort of northish a little bit.
Yeah, northish, yeah. The other thing that, you know, going back to science, the other thing that Brexit has stopped is the Erasmus programme, which is, you know, again, that was a massive boost to us and to young people who could travel to Europe to do, you know, like internships in Europe, and European students could come back to us. And why they stopped that, you know, it just seems mad that they stopped it for the sake of it, really.
Yeah, it's maybe a symptom. I don't know. I have no clearer idea than you do, but I suspect it's got something to do with the fact that the right wing that took over the old Conservative Party
Yeah, I think so.
had this sort of this myopic obsession with you know, sovereignty and the need for control one's own borders and all this nonsense, which I guess eventually resulted in an antipathy towards anything that wasn't there. You know.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
One
but
reason
they just seem to be doing it. I don't. I mean, I don't understand the mindset of the people who are the Jacob Rees-Moggs of the world. So I don't know where they come from at all. But it doesn't seem to be very productive to anybody. You know, removing funding for science and basically collaboration between the UK and Europe for science.
Well, we had a guest on the week before last, a guy called Professor Danny Dorling, and he's written a book called Rule Britannia, and he connects empire, views about empire, to Brexit, i.e. it was promoted by a bunch of people who wanted to go back to sort of Victorian times, because that's the way they saw Britain. It was a colonial power, and they felt that they were robbed of that, and Brexit was a way to try and recover a chunk of that. You know, but if you feel that way, I can understand why Brexit makes sense, because you know you're going to turn your back on the world because you're going to create the British Empire anew.
It just makes no sense.
Makes no sense to me. Tell us a little bit about Europe and the Yes for EU, because you're a prime mover in Yes for EU. Is that right?
Yes, so basically, Yes for EU started as 2019, 2020, just before the pandemic. We launched during the pandemic at the very start, and basically it was a breakaway movement from Edinburgh for Europe. So Edinburgh for Europe had been campaigning against Brexit for years, and I was a part of that. I was also part of Perth for Europe. So because I live in Kinross, but I work in Edinburgh, I've always kind of moved between the two in terms of activism. And so basically, Morag, our convener, got a group of people together and said, we'll start this new campaign that basically we think the only way back to Europe is to become independent. And so we're going to start the movement Yes for EU. So many of the people who were in Edinburgh for Europe joined us, and then we've had many more members join since. And basically, I mean, we're very active. We're mostly in Edinburgh, but we have people who are members all over Scotland. And it's, you know, we are quite an active group. And we actually campaign on the streets of Edinburgh at least every second week or once a month, depending on the weather, etc. But
fascinating. Well, we've posted on the screen. If people want to get in touch with, it's www.yesforeu.scot. So if you want to get in touch with it. I'm going to take a couple of seconds. I'm going to wipe my eyes. You folks don't know this, Lesley does, but I've got the worst possible hay fever. And I'm not lachrymose because of anything that Lesley has said. I'm afraid it's completely unconnected. Although some of the things you just said are tear-jerking because they're just so awful. You know, the notion that cancer research might be in any way impeded because some idiot has this sort of hankering to go back to the Victorian times is just the most awful thing to contemplate. So from time to time, I'm going to have to sort of do this just so that I can see the screen more clearly. I don't know where this hay fever came from. It's just pollen induced, I guess. It's this time of the year. Tell us a little bit about life in the branch at Kinross.
So, yeah, I mean, I think we spoke about this a little bit earlier, but the sort of, I think activism and the life in sort of any active group, campaigning for anything, really changed after the pandemic. So I think, before the pandemic, the things, people came, it was very active. There was a lot of people came to the branch meetings. Since the pandemic, we do have the meetings as hybrid, but I think that sort of takes away from some of the interactions that you have with people. So I have to say that the pandemic has really kind of impacted on, I think, a lot of groups. And Kinross, we've gone back to in-person events. With Yes for EU, we still have them online because our members come from all over Scotland. And actually, I think maybe online meetings for these things are the way forward, because then people can join without having to go out in the cold and things. So yeah, so I'm the political education officer in our branch. And I do my best to keep the branch up to date with what's going on. As you listeners might hear, that I have multiple hats, and so it's quite difficult to keep up with all my different roles that I'm supposed to be doing in life. I'm also, a mum of 3 adults and a grandmother of 2. So with family, work, teaching, I do a lot of as well. It's busy.
Isn't it an old cliche though? If you want something done, ask somebody who's very busy.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, it seems to be the case, I mean, but you've got a fairly sizable membership. You've got about 200 now, is that right?
Yeah, so we have a big membership in Kinrossshire, we call ourselves. So it's Kinross plus the surrounding areas, and we do have a big membership. We do find it difficult to get people to come out. So if any of our members are listening tonight or viewing us, I urge you to get in touch and come along to the meetings, because I think that it would be nice to get more people at the meetings, and also to, when we do we do actually have a lot of people who leaflet for us. We always get, and we've done very well in the last since I joined the branch. John Nicholson became an MP and Jim Fairley became the MSP, and the Richard Waters also became our local councillor. So we've got a good record.
Yeah. No, we've had, I think I'm trying to remember if we had Richard on the show, but we certainly had Jim on the show. So next time you're talking to John Nicholson, if we haven't had him on the show, we'd like to have him on the show.
Yeah, I'll tell him. Yeah.
And I take your point about leafleting. I've never been hugely convinced about the efficacy of leafleting, in the sense that it's changing anyone's minds, because I think what happens is that people are just, they're inundated with paper, and they've got busy lives, and but it's a very time consuming, and I've done my fair bit of leafleting with Jock Keith and others, and it keeps you fit, that's for sure.
Jock's amazing.
And I miss it from that point of view. But I do remain somewhat unconvinced about its efficacy when it comes to actually changing people's minds. I think your point about online stuff is much more likely, and it's because it's much cheaper. And I take your point too about COVID. I mean, I think COVID was life-changing for many people, some in the very worst sense of that term, but it also had an impact upon people's behavior about going out, and because once you lose the habit, as it were, of mixing, it's sort of difficult to the funny thing is, I suspect, because you have so many hats, you've probably been less affected by that sense than people who perhaps have a couple of 3 things in their lives. There's an old story about busyness. You tend to sort of say, well, that was a problem that's gone, I can go on with it the rest of the
life. I think that is true, that I don't, when I think back, I think, well, what did it, because I do most of my work these days at a computer, even though I would like to be in a laboratory. Unfortunately, I have people who are in the lab, and I spend my time at the computer. And so, when the pandemic came, I think I just worked harder than I ever did, which is the same for a lot of people, especially in teaching and who work for the universities, etc. So yeah, just worked really hard, and then I was like, oh, did anybody have a time off for it? So yeah.
So you work in an institution, a university. One of the biggest concerns about institutions generally, and this is right across well, not just the UK, it extends well beyond the UK, is the fact that sometimes women don't get paid as much as men. Is that something that troubles you?
It does trouble me, and I'm not going to talk about the GRR and whether I believe in it or not, but one of the things that kind of upset me about the whole argument around that and the whole, stushy that people were making is that there's a lot of things that affect women's lives, like every day, and the gender pay gap was one of them. And I think that was, and I'm not belittling people who didn't support the GRR by any means, because everybody is entitled to their own views. But my gripe, I suppose, is that things like the gender pay gap is big and within universities. I actually looked up recently, and it's 16% in Edinburgh University.
What's the justification?
Sorry?
What's the justification for that?
So the document was quite interesting, actually, and I think that the reason that they gave was because women tend to do the roles at the university. So that's taking all the roles at the university, and the roles that the women have tend to be in the sort of service and support staff, and at the lower ends of the university grades, whereas the men are more shifted towards the higher end of the university grades, especially in professorships. So the numbers of male and female professors at the university, the difference is huge. I think it's getting better. I was made professor last year, and there was actually 3 or 4 females in my institute all got made professor at the same time. So that was a really big, that was really good progress. But
the skills are the professor. Let's take an example of professor skills. Are those public? I mean, is that? Would you
know?
So
you do. So the scale is public, but what people are on it, you wouldn't know. So what they did do is take that scale and say, well, what do men get paid and what do women get paid? And there was still, I think the difference in that scale was bigger than any of the other ones. And the reason that they give is that a lot of the men on that scale are clinicians, and who get paid more because of NHS contracts. So
surely that's a separate standalone activity. The fact that it's another job.
Yeah, exactly.
That's no bearing on the scale that they're primarily.
I know. So so I think
on the reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still so much work to be done there. And I think the biggest thing is trying to, so, I see it in every day, that the people at the university who are the students who are PhD students and maybe have finished their PhDs, and then the first job after that is called a postdoc. And it's very, very heavily female, weighted towards females. But as you go on, the weighting becomes more and more towards men, because it's very, very difficult to stay in academia and have a family, like it probably is in any big institution, to progress through the career structure while having a family.
Maybe the thing is that if you look at other countries, they seem to manage it so much better. There's more support for women.
Yes, yeah. I mean,
we've had people from the Scandinavian countries talking about child development, i.e. the fact that children there start school at 6.
Yeah.
And you say, well, how can people manage around that? And the answer is because the government pays for nurseries.
Yeah.
Generously.
Yeah.
And because they say, otherwise, how could it possibly work?
I know. Well, my son lived in Berlin with one child, and then he's moved with a second child. But Tommy, who is 4 now, he went to Kita from when he was, I think, a year in Germany, completely paid for full time. So there's not this big outgoing, because obviously to put a child into, especially a young child, into nursery here is so expensive. I think, sorry, two, I should say. But to put a young child into nursery here is so expensive that for a lot of people it's not worth their while staying at work to do that. So yeah, I think, but given the Scottish government their due, the SNP their due, since I am I do support the SNP, is that the family, him and his family, just moved to Glasgow, and they now my grandson gets childcare there, and actually they don't think it's that much different in terms of cost than it was in Germany. That's because he's 4, he's at preschool now, so he gets.
Oh, I lived in London for a bit, and I was always struck by the fact that so many women worked extraordinarily long hours just to pay for nursery education.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, that's where all the money went. It didn't go in the house. It didn't go to buy things for the kids. It just went to pay fees at nursery. Yeah. And all the time we were torn emotionally about leaving the child and stuff like this. It just seemed to me to be an extraordinary mess. That would be relatively straightforward to fix.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think
rocket science here.
I think moving to sort of talking about independence and what we want to see out of Scotland as an independent country, and I think that is, one of the really the things that we should address is, as supporting women to get back into work by helping with childcare, and I think. Germany isn't great. I don't think it is great because there isn't nurseries, etc. It's difficult to get, especially depending where you are. But I think there's a lot of family, like dependency on family in some areas in Germany, and so. But I think here we should try and build a society where we do support women to get back into work, or to get into work without having to pay these huge childcare costs. And then hopefully that'll work into being less of a gender pay gap in the end.
Exactly. I mean, you'd like to think that, wouldn't you? And also maybe it might have another effect too, which is one of the things I notice. I travel around a lot, particularly when you're in countries in Southern Europe. There's a big thing about the family. For a lot of people, family comes first.
Yeah.
But they still have careers. I mean, fantastic careers.
Yeah.
But huge chunks of the year are given over to the family.
Yeah.
State does that. The state says you're all going to go on holiday for a week.
Yeah. They have in Spain, they have so many holidays and saints' days and like celebrations of, one thing or another, where all the communities get together as well. So it's not just not just families, but, like celebrations where communities get together, which is absolutely lovely. Yeah. And again, it's something that we should be doing far more here, having, like holidays where communities get together.
Maybe
we'll celebrate independence.
Maybe the Scottish government should take one of the conventional holidays that are on just now. I don't know what. I've even forgotten the names of some of them. I remember when I was at school, one was called Empire Day. I have no idea what the hell that was about, except it doesn't sound that terribly redeeming. But there was also Victoria Day. But just take one of those days and rename it Scotland Day, and say that it's families, and we're going to make it. Actually, we're going to make it 2 days, but Friday and Monday, so that families can get together.
A long weekend, yeah. The problem in Scotland is everybody just uses these occasions to get absolutely wasted.
Well, I think they do that everywhere.
All that happens is the hospitals get full up, so I'm not sure about it.
Well, you see, maybe that takes you back to another way that society becomes distorted, because when somebody's getting wasted, it's generally they're sharing that time with people of the same gender.
Yeah. And
maybe if it was a family occasion,
yeah, that's true,
there wouldn't be the temptation to get absolutely blutered. Because
have you ever been to? I lived in Auchtermuchty for 25 years. Have you ever been to Auchtermuchty Festival?
Yes, I've been to the Control show as well. So for my I mean, a lot of that had to do with sort of working class men in particular getting together.
Yeah.
But that all stemmed from a sort of very male-driven, it seemed to me, culture,
Yeah.
where women were seen to be subservient, and therefore you don't have to worry too much about that. And also, kids were, well, that's what women were there for, to look after
Yeah.
kids. But I always got the sense there was some connotations of that around some of the celebrations that took place. But then, as you say, society can be reordered. You just have to have the will
Yeah.
and the
I mean, I
mechanism.
think that this is something that's very close to my heart, actually. And and it is about the reordering of society, and it's to do with the spaces that for families in Scotland. We've been moaning about this for years, and my son had exactly the same thing at the weekend, that he wanted to go out in Edinburgh off an evening, not late, but evening time, with a child, and they wouldn't let him in anywhere because there was nowhere to go that you could take children and just have a nice relaxed family time in the evening, rather than going to a pub, which is, people don't, and the coffee shops are all shut.
Yeah.
So, there's not this kind of culture of being able to go out. And I don't understand in Edinburgh, where they expect the people who are visiting, like tourists, to go with their families if they don't provide anywhere for them to go.
Yeah.
So
Here's a thought. I think a lot of that attitudinal behaviour stemmed from Thatcher, where it was all about making money, and therefore that to some degree meant reducing costs. It also meant, as she said, there's no such thing as society. So an individual could do what they liked, perhaps to the great detriment of society. And that meant avoid paying taxes, overcharging, and no sense of community, because she saw no value in community. All the things that you hold dear, she saw as valueless.
yeah.
So she tried
So
to.
this is what the sort of the idea we have to get over for an independent Scotland, I suppose, is that these are the values that, in an independent Scotland we are going to promote, as values of community, values of family, and values of looking after each other, which is what Scotland is actually recognized for now, and it's what I think the title of our show is talking about democracy, but it's actually what we vote. The democratic will of the Scottish people is to have that kind of society. They want that kind of society, and we continually are getting another kind of society, as you talk about Thatcher, kind of imposed on us, which is why
But you're right about other places like Spain, for example. It's very common in Spain. People go out to eat at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
With children.
Yeah.
Children. And nobody turns a hair.
And nobody's getting wasted in the street, or people are just out having a nice time.
I would go further. I would say the people who operate these establishments welcome children.
Yeah.
In other words, their faces light up when children come in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Too often in Scotland, you get the opposite effect. Good God, there's some kids there making a noise. Well, but that's what kids do. They do make a noise,
Yeah.
But that's a cultural thing. You either find that deeply offensive or you don't. And I think a lot of that is driven by values and the detachment, the atomization of society. In other words, the notion that families are not terribly highly valued.
Yeah.
Individual performance is, by contrast. And that's very sad because it produces a whole bunch of disaffected people, it seems to me, which is
I think that is, thinking about it, the sort of how families are and children are valued is really important, and it is something that we could learn a lot from other European nations, I think, because and that is especially talked about the Scandinavian countries as well, that the putting the children first is going to help to build a better, a nicer society, I think, and the one that we want to live in. So.
And you're right about entertainment too. I mean, the experience your son had, you would never have that experience in Southern Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been to a restaurant in Southern Europe where somebody's ever said to me, "Oh, by the way, you need to be out by 8 o'clock."
Yeah, I know.
Seriously. I mean, nobody would even dream of saying such a thing in Southern Europe.
Yeah, they had a baby who's 6 months old who's asleep, and they wouldn't let them into a burger restaurant in Edinburgh. It's madness.
And what reason was provided for this?
Oh, licensing. They just say anything. Licensing usually.
License. Come on, give me a break. And if that is the case, if that's true, and there's somebody in the audience tonight saying, "Well, that is the case," you know, if I work in Edinburgh, I work in a burger joint, whatever, and there are licensing problems. Well, there shouldn't be licensing problems.
I know.
It should take care of that. And that, you know, that again, you're back to your point about democracy. It seems to me if it means anything at all, it must mean that people who have a concern, like the ones we're talking about tonight, about families and the importance of families, etc., that voice is heard clearly. And maybe with this SNP contest that's coming up, maybe somebody somewhere will raise that with one of the candidates. We've actually asked all of the candidates to come on the show.
All right. And have they agreed?
No, in fact, we've not heard back from anyone yet. But I'm not
early days.
I'm not going to make any excuses for anyone, but it's early days, and let me just say that they're very welcome to come on. You know, we don't have a brief for any particular candidate, so you know we'd be more than happy to have them on, and they will get a chance to talk to people like you're doing tonight to say this is what I think is important, and this is why. I mean,
I definitely the licensing laws and around allowing families to go out in the evening and have time that is not in a pub or whatever, I think is really important to allow people to go out and get that sense of community that we're talking about, because it's the same with, you know, older people as well. And these, you know, when my parents are in Spain, they go out almost every night because the people in the bars, and you know, it's a kind of cafe culture, maybe a bit different to here, but then so many people here are just old elderly people are stuck in their houses with, you know, like, and there's nowhere for them to go, or they can't really get out to go anywhere. So if you had cafes that were open later at night, then it would, you know, it would help everybody to. So if any entrepreneurs are out there and you want to open a late night cafe in Edinburgh, I'll come every night to support you.
There you are. There you are. Well, you know, it's interesting because, you know, so many of the best businesses came from exactly what you're just saying. I mean, McDonald's grew out of a guy that was selling soda fountains, and he wasn't very good at it. And what happened was that he ended up in a burger joint in California run by two brothers called McDonald, with a arch system for you know, represent the M.
As my 4-year-old said at the weekend, the M shop. Can we go to the M shop?
Exactly, the M. Let's go to the M shop. Yeah. And this guy said to these two brothers, "You go through more soda machines than any of my other customers. Why is that?" And they said, "Maybe because we've got more customers." And he said, "Okay, but why do you have more customers than the one next door?" And he watched them and discovered the secret was, you know, customer service.
Yeah,
that's what they were predicated upon. And so it's not rocket science. I mean, you go ask people, what is it that you want? What is it that you like? What is it you don't like? You know, and there's a lesson there for the candidates, by the way. Go and ask people. You don't sit in an ivory tower and say, "Oh, I think I can somehow suss this out." You actually have to get down there and do the grunt work and ask the questions. And just like a good researcher does, you don't just say, "Oh, I've got a feeling in my water, it's this." You actually get down there and do the hard yards. God, I got that completely wrong. And I'm so glad I did the work.
I know. Well, to be fair, I think, you know, well, we won't talk about the loss of Nicola Sturgeon, but I think that's what I did like about a lot of her policies, is it did look like she had done the research and had, you know, taken quite a scientific approach to some of the you know, they didn't always work. I'm not saying everything was great, but I think it did look like at least they were trying to take a kind of scientific approach to making policy.
Yeah, I think you make an important point there. Leaving aside the particular incumbent, in this case, Nicola, the reality is that if you look at any secessionist or separatist or independence movement across history, they're riven with all sorts of different groups saying, "I'd like to do this, and I think we should do that," and all the rest of it, which is probably why they end up producing a draft constitution, because it squelches all of that stuff. Otherwise, you run the severe danger of everyone going off at different tangents and saying, "Oh, I think what the people want is this, what the people want is that." You draft a constitution, you put it to the people, and you can say, "There you are. Now we know what the people want."
Yeah.
We endorsed it,
Yeah, I think I think that would be a good plan, actually, to at least do that. And then, if you put that forward at the whatever we do next, if it's a de facto referendum or whichever it is, but if you put that forward and say this is what we're going to do, this is our plan, then people can vote or they can't, but at least they know what the plan is.
Well, what you can say is, look, this is a draft constitution. It's not for independence. It just says, if we were to be independent, this is what we stand for, and this is what we will not stand for as a country. You don't need anyone's permission to do that. You can draft it right now, and you can put it to the people. Now, if some of the people don't want to get involved in it, don't want to endorse it, well, that's their lookout. Because, as they say, it's a free country. But at least then you've got something that you can point people to and say, this is what folks agreed was important in this new state that we envisage. And you're giving people a chance.
Yeah.
Even if they don't like independence, you're giving them a chance to say, here's the shape it will take.
I think this is really, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. The conversations are driven at the moment by the media, and as we talked to, we sort of spoke about earlier, they're driving the conversations that are very distracting, that they think are going to take people away from talking about democracy, for example, but also talking about the type of country Scotland could be if we did what the people in Scotland vote for, which is having a fair society and all the things we've been speaking about. And I think that what we have to try and do is, as much as everybody, including myself, gets involved in all these social media spats, etc., as we have to just ignore them and keep putting out positive messages of what kind of Scotland we want to have and what we want Scotland to be, and not play their game. And I know it's very hard. I try my hardest and I don't succeed, but
I think you're right. I mean, what will happen from now on, and in fairness, the Conservatives have been very open about it. They've said, we're going to lose if we talk the economy. We're going to lose if we talk democracy. We're going to lose if we talk about young people. We're going to lose if we talk about Brexit. But if we can divide the opposition by talking about social issues, about gender issues, about whatever, then frankly, if we can start a series of culture wars, and get the opposition all fighting amongst themselves so that they disregard democracy. They don't talk about Brexit. They don't talk about young people. They don't talk about the society they want. And if we can encourage that degree of infighting, there's nothing new about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I was watching on television the other night there, and I was struck by the fact that was exactly what is exactly what the British did in India. So, are you happy to sit down with these Muslim people and talk about this constitutional change?
Yeah.
I mean, after all, they're a different religion, and and then they would say to the Muslim community, "Well, these guys go about and they're worshipping cows." I mean, is that something you feel strongly about?
I mean,
it's about culture wars, and
unfortunately, I think that a lot of people have fallen into that trap, and I think we have to kind of see it for what it is. But going back to democracy, I think that we have to really be pushing the democracy issue and the lack of democracy in Scotland. And for me, that's the thing that I've been passionate about actually since I was very young, because I fought for a Scottish Parliament originally when I was younger, and after however many years of Thatcher government, and everybody in Scotland voted Labour, but we always got a Tory government, and then obviously we did get the Scottish Parliament, but then it's not really helped us, because a lot of the major issues, as we all know, are governed by Westminster still, including the money, which is the main thing. And so I think that for me, I think that even though it's really good to have an independence campaign, I think we also need a democracy campaign. And I think we have to start highlighting the lack of democracy in Scotland and the sort of democratic deficit. And people see it. in other countries, I think. And, you know, they can see that Scotland didn't vote for Brexit, but we still don't have any tomatoes. Scotland, our science industry is still, you know, science is still affected. Everything's, you know, fishing industry, everything's affected, but we didn't vote for it. So
exactly. And you know something, if you talk democracy, you talk Brexit, you cut right across the culture war, and you say, let's park that. Let's park the culture war, and let's talk about the stuff that really affects everyone, regardless of what their views are.
Well, this is, I think, you know, the tweet I put out originally when you asked me to come on this was basically saying that everybody in Scotland, even if they don't support independence, they should be worried at the fact that our democracy has been eroded, because basically, you know, what's happening now is that the bills that are going through Westminster could basically take so many powers away from the Scottish Parliament that, you know, our food standards could be affected, our water, the standards of our water could be affected, our health service would be affected. So, you know, our laws are going to be affected. You know, we can't even make our own laws because they could overturn whatever the Scottish government decides. So I think that even if you don't support independence, I think that you have to be worried about that. And yes, you know, Labour might make a comeback in the next election, but who's to know what will happen after that? You know, it might only be 4 years and we might be back here again. So,
Lesley, Labour have already said that we're going to try and make Brexit work.
Yeah, exactly. They're well, you know, my eyes, they're no different. I am, yeah, that's my other passion about how annoyed I am at Labour for not opposing Brexit and not even trying. But
what does that term mean to you? I plan to make Brexit work.
I don't know.
It's meaningless.
Yeah.
It's just jargon.
Yeah.
And the reason it's being said, according to some of the people we've interviewed from south of the border, is it's an attempt to win back the so-called red wall of previous Labour seats in the north of England. But, you know, we had Danny Dorling on the show, and he pointed out that that was a myth. The bulk of the Brexit votes did not come from the north of England. The vast bulk of them came from the southeast. And there was a majority to leave in the north of England, but it was modest. The bulk of the no votes came from Surrey and Sussex and Cornwall, all down the south. They didn't come from the north. So this notion that, oh, there's some sort of strange,
you know, that war,
nothing to do with that. Absolutely nothing. The facts don't substantiate it. And of course, this is what happens when you get the sort of, I guess, the media we have in the UK, is that you don't get to the facts.
Yeah.
I mean, you spend your whole life dealing with facts.
I know. I mean, this is what I think, you know, it does really upset me as well, having worked, you know, like done work in the grassroots kind of yes movement, is that one that is never covered. So if you didn't live in, you know, if you didn't know what was going on, if you only watched BBC or STV, you wouldn't know that there was actually any, you know, that there was a big independence movement, and they wanted everybody to think independence was Nicola Sturgeon, and I can see why they did that. But I think that the media have got a real, I've really dumbed down. That they don't do a really good kind of, you know, there obviously are very good investigative journalists out there, and you know that I'm sure lots of the BBC journalists are very unhappy the fact that they're doing kind of very superficial pieces, you know, to do with GRR or whatever.
I used to believe that, and I was more than sympathetic to that view, frankly, that these people have got to pay their mortgage, and therefore that when the boss comes in and says, I want to do another piece slamming the SNP, that's what they did, regardless of their own personal views. They may be independent supporters, but if you want to pay your mortgage and the boss says, I want you to jump all over Nicola Sturgeon, that's what you do. In fact, generally what you say is how high. You don't say, you don't challenge it. You know, there's no challenge goes on. And one of the results of that is that there tends to be a temptation to go tabloid. If I don't believe in anything, right? I don't believe in anything. I have no moral code anymore, or my moral code has been diminished. Then I'm going to go tabloid. I'm going to focus on things. If it bleeds, it leads. So in other words, I don't want to deal with big issues. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to deal with democracy. What I want to deal with is little Jenny, who arrive late at school because the bus was held up, and I want to interview a government minister. And you think, well, this is pathetic. And
I
you should
know.
be
Some,
ashamed that
some
you
of
did.
the level of reporting in Scotland, and there's so many big issues. One of, as we were spoken about Brexit, one of the things is that there's nobody that really looks. There are programs that come out, and I'm not slating journalists in any way, and they are trying, but if you just looked at some of the news stations, they don't really go into depth about the effect that Brexit is having on Scotland, on science. Where have you ever heard anybody talking about how Brexit is affecting science and industry? Well, industry you hear about, but science and technology is.
I mean, you say that, but when the BBC did a piece on the shortage of tomatoes and the fact that the supermarket shelves were empty, they didn't mention Brexit. They didn't mention Brexit. I mean, in closing, I'll mention who did mention Brexit, and that's the ex-CEO of Sainsbury's.
I did see that. I saw that clip today, actually.
He was only able to do that on Sky.
Is that right?
Because the BBC will not run anything that's negative about Brexit. Certainly in the news. I mean, you might see it occasionally in some program about, I don't know, the shortage of olive oil, but I mean, it's wrapped up in something else. In a way that's intended to confuse and conflate different things in a way it's intended to be the very opposite of enlightening and empowering. And when was the last time you saw a piece on democracy?
I know. I mean, the thing is that the fact that they're trying to play down the effects that the democratic deficit in Scotland, and they play down the effect, the Section 35, for example, as if they talk about that as if, well, that's always been there, and it's okay for the Westminster to overturn the rules that the Scottish Parliament made. And as I think that Hunsar Yusuf said, is that if they do that now, they could do so. For example, once they try and get their trade deal with whoever, and they want to come in and change the health service, for example, want to change the NHS or sell off parts of our NHS, that they can. And Scotland don't want that. What stops them from overriding the laws that Scotland make in order to do that? I don't know that. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I can't see why.
You don't have to be a lawyer. The fact of the matter is that power devolved is power retained. So what that means is that if I devolve power to you, I still retain it, which means I can withdraw it from you at any moment as I wish. I don't have to explain that to you. I don't have to convince you. I just can do it. And that's why devolution doesn't work. And it's also why federalism doesn't work.
Yeah.
We'll have people on the show in a couple of weeks' time who are very much in favor of federalism, and I'll be putting that point to them. If you have one party who could decide, this is what I believe, and you have to believe it too.
Yeah.
That's not democratic. And you can cloak it in a word, call it federalism, call it whatever the heck you like, devolution. But at the end of the day, if I'm telling you what to do, you don't have any power. And if I can take away that power at any minute, it's even worse. I just want to say a big thank you to Mr. E, who has contributed to the crowdfunder tonight. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Mm-hmm. I hope other people will feel likewise, because, we complained about the media, right? But it's only through channels like this and this program that, in fact, we get to hear from people like you, and not just a soundbite, for an extended length of time. And I have to say, in closing, I mean, the hour has gone, by the way, Lesley.
It went very quick. I was worried I would have too much to say for an hour.
Well, I did say to you that you won't be able to cover a whole.
I've never been known for my inability to talk, though.
So. Well, this is it. The purpose of our show is to be educational and entertaining and enlightening, and that's what we've been doing tonight. I'm just going to take a few closing remarks, Lesley. If you could stick around after we go off air, I would appreciate that. Just let me say again a big thank you to Lesley for being an outstanding guest tonight. And obviously, a big thank you to all of you for joining us. And thanks for your comments and your questions. Thanks again for those who contributed to the crowdfunder. The reality is, as Lesley and I were discussing, if you don't like the media, if you don't like the way it's conducting itself, if you're just plain ticked off why something, support Indie Live. Indie Live has a whole raft of shows. Go to independencelive.net. You'll see there's a wealth of stuff there. There's a whole rich variety of shows. You don't have to depend on the BBC or any other of the broadcasting channels. You have your own channels here. All you have to do is exploit it. By the way, look out next week for David Stoddard of the South of Scotland Independence Movement. And let me just touch again upon the former boss of Sainsbury's, a gentleman called Justin King, who made it quite plain on Sky earlier today that Brexit and government's ineptitude are entirely to blame for the present rash of empty shelves in your supermarkets. So remember that, even though people will not be open about it on the BBC, the reality is government ineptitude and Brexit are causing the empty shelves. And I can say with some assurance, because I've seen shelves in Spain that are absolutely groaning with fresh fruit and vegetables. There is no shortage. That's a lie. There are no shortages in continental Europe of vegetables. That's a lie. You were told a lie. I'm sorry to have to say this, but that's a fact. You were told a lie. Always a big reminder to look out for Dr. Elliot Bulmer's column in the Sunday National this weekend. You'll find it in the 7 Days Supplement. It's always a great read. And to all of you, thanks for joining us. Stay safe, take care, and we'll see you all next week. And right now, whatever you're doing, stop doing it and rush off and send some money to the crowdfunder. Thanks again. Much appreciated. Take care. See you next week.
Thank you, John.